Alvin B. Rubin was born to be a judge. He had a profound respect for the law and the limitations it imposes on judges. But he also had a warm, compassionate feeling for all human beings, regardless of race, color, creed, or gender. And with his encyclopedic knowledge of the law and towering intellect, he was able to find means of redressing unfairness within the bounds of legal propriety when others might have despaired and yielded to circumstances apparently beyond their control.
But there's a great story about him graduating as valedictorian, because in those days the valedictorian was elected by the class.
And his best friend, one of his best friends in that class was Russell Long. And Russell was running, obviously, for valedictorian as well, being the son of a politician as he was, and the future politician he became. And Russell Long came to my dad and said, "Alvin, the other candidate is saying to other class members not to vote for you because you're Jewish. I will withdraw my nomination as valedictorian under one condition. You let me run your campaign to be valedictorian." So Russell Long withdrew, campaigned for my dad. My dad was elected valedictorian. His friends were going into the service. My dad desperately wanted to get into the service. He couldn't, he had flat feet, so he had medical, the doctors would not approve him. He kept writing to the Army to let him in. We have those letters. He asked for recommendations from Dean Hebert, who would write letters for on his behalf to get in any manner whatsoever. Many of his classmates went in 41, 42. We have the records that my dad applied in 42 and served until 46. He eventually went into the Quartermaster Corps as a captain, went to officer candidate school or officer training school, served in the ETO, the European Theater of Operations, in Patton's Army, and ran what was called the Big Red One, the first division of Patton's Army. He was the quartermaster in that first division, running the supplies as they followed the troops through France, Belgium, Germany. It was during the time that he was away. He had been dating my mother, seeing my mother, not married obviously at the time. During college, they were not engaged during law school. We have the letters that he wrote to her during World War II on onion skin paper from France and from Belgium. We have pictures that he sent her in uniform from France and Belgium, and clearly they were making plans to get married. He was released in early 46, went immediately to California after being released from another camp in the United States to go from his service to California, where my mother was, because her father was in the service in California, and they were stationed there, and they were married in California near San Francisco in 1946. I think he applied to an oil company as an in-house lawyer. They looked in California. I think they really wanted to get back to Louisiana. He interviewed, talked to some law firms, as I recall, in Shreveport and Baton Rouge, and you want to take it from there?
And then he joined a firm that J.Y. Sanders, who was a Huey Long opponent, had formed, and they ended up forming a law firm here in Baton Rouge. And it was called Sanders, Miller, Downing, Rubin, and Keene. And they ran that law firm for years until he got appointed to the bench. Within a year of graduating, he was asked to teach at the law school. So he started teaching as an adjunct professor, and he taught for 46 years. And he taught almost every course in the law school. I mean, he taught first-year courses and second-year courses and third-year courses. In fact, he taught the first course in negotiations ever taught in the country. So lawyers, at least lawyers who have books still in their offices, have the green books with the revised statutes, and volumes 10, 11, and 12 are the formularies. And in 1960, we had adopted in Louisiana the Code of Civil Procedure. Well, Henry George McMahon and my father wrote volumes 10, 11, and 12 of the Code of Civil Procedure, and so it's McMahon and Rubin, so he was writing that. In addition, in those days, we adopted a trust code in the 1960s. Before then, trusts were prohibited substitutions. You couldn't have them in the civil law. And our father, as both a tax lawyer and as a writer, and my mother together jointly wrote a book on the trust code.
I remember sitting, this would have been in the late summer probably, maybe early summer of '66, in our porch eating a Sunday lunch. I can still see myself, 4 of us around a table, my mother saying, we're going to move to New Orleans next June. And I didn't quite understand why. I mean, she told me why. I didn't quite understand at the time, and I was not happy about it. Certainly, I don't know the details. Ultimately, he was nominated by Senator Long, recommended by Senator Long to President Johnson. Gary W. was a case of the Texas children, where a number of handicapped, disabled children were sent by the state of Louisiana to Texas because Louisiana didn't have the facilities to house them. And of course, this was very painful for the parents. They couldn't visit their children. They were housed in Texas. The conditions were very, very bad. And ultimately, a lawsuit was brought called Gary W. versus the state of Louisiana. And the case went on. My dad entered finally at trial in order to bring the children home. But that case, the state of Louisiana remained under an order of the conditions under which these children could be held even in Louisiana. That case did not end till late 90s, ultimately ended in the late 90s, long after my dad was passed away. He had a number of desegregation cases, both in New Orleans, the New Orleans Athletic Club, as well as up in the Felicianas, and he issued a number of desegregation orders for school systems. We had crosses burned in our yard, a cross burned in our yard.
Crosses burned in our yard. At one point, he desegregated the Tangipahoa Parish school system, and I recall there was a newspaper story from the local paper at the time. It had a picture of a monkey in a cage on the cover, and the only caption said, Judge Rubin.
I think my dad was influenced by what the Fifth Circuit, at that time, the very large Fifth Circuit throughout the South, was doing to support desegregation cases in the South. And I think he was influenced by that, but I think also his own makeup, his own sense of what was right and what was just and what was fair was driving him for that too. In '78, he was nominated to be on the Fifth Circuit. Judge Wisdom was taking senior status, and he was going to take the Wisdom seat. My wife and I went to the confirmation hearing in the Senate. At that time, it was a very different time. Senator Long, who I think at that time was chair of the Appropriation Committee, of course, he had been nominated, my dad had been nominated by President Carter on the suggestion of Senator Long. And I vividly remember being at the hearing, and my dad, Senator Long, comes in and says a few words, and the chair of the Judiciary Committee says, well, Senator Long, if Judge Rubin's good enough for you, he's good enough for us. I don't have any questions, not one question. His Fifth Circuit opinions, there are a number that are very important and consequential. Probably the most consequential is Edmondson Concrete, which was a Fifth Circuit case dealing with peremptory exceptions used by prosecutors selectively, allegedly, against African Americans. And my dad dissented from the Fifth Circuit in February. This opinion came out in February of 1991. Dissented from the Fifth Circuit, saying it was unconstitutional. That case went up on writs to the United States Supreme Court, Leesville versus Edmondson. And our dad died June 9th of 1991. The opinion is dated June 6th from the Supreme Court of 1991, which reversed the Fifth Circuit and adopted my father's dissent. On the date my dad died, June 9th, Justice Kennedy wrote my mother a letter. Justice Kennedy wrote the majority opinion. Justice Kennedy wrote my mother and said, "I have just learned today of Alvin's death. I'm very sorry." Attached is a letter that I had intended to send to Alvin, also dated June 9th, telling him that we have adopted his dissent. Here is the unsigned letter dictated to Alvin, and I send my condolences.
Yeah, the McDaniel case was a case involving the use of peremptory challenges in the 1970s. And the question was, if there was evidence that the peremptory challenge was used to strike blacks disproportionately, could that be considered? And he wrote an opinion that's still being quoted today. And I talked earlier about his favorite author being Edmund Kahn, who wrote a book called The Sense of Injustice. Well, in the McDaniel case, he writes an opinion that first he quotes from Kahn, and then he says, "However elusive the concept must be, there is a universal feeling, not confined to philosophers, lawyers, and judges, that there is a quality known as justice, and it is the aim of legal institutions to achieve it. The Constitution invokes that sense and sentiment in its first phrase. It is ordained, quote, to establish justice. Justice must not only be done, it must be seen."
I mean, to me, the greatest tribute is that judges keep citing his opinions and the events that are still held in his honor and memory. First being the Federal Bar Association in New Orleans, which has, for more than a quarter century, had a wonderful annual seminar in his name, which the family is eternally grateful for, and is always a nice program and a wonderful memory. And secondly, after his death, his law clerks principally and family members and others funded a professorship at the Law Center in his and my mother's name, at which we have brought in speakers.
After he died, the LSU Law Review devoted an issue to him, and there's a wonderful tributes. The one that stands out in my mind is what Judge John Minor Wisdom said, which is that he stands with a group that includes learned hand.
And the Texas Law Review also did a full edition for him as well, an honorary edition. And the particular article in either of those that I really like is my mother's in the Louisiana Law Review, which is Judge Rubin as a person, and what she talks about, how he became the man he became. And that to me is the best summary of what he became, how this boy she knew became this judge she was married to. He was a wonderful parent. He was a loving father. He was devoted to his family, but devoted to his profession and to the country. He was a child. He was a first-generation American. His father coming in from Russia.
He used to love to do naturalization ceremonies.
As many judges do, and they find that to be so instrumental. But I think I mean, my mother was a third generation American. My father was a first generation American, and he had his father had lost family during the wars in Europe, and he knew what a privilege it was to be a citizen. And my grandfather, his father, who comes from Russia, becomes naturalized, serves in World War I as a U.S. soldier.
There's a phrase in Hebrew, tikkun olam, which is to repair the world. And I think his volunteer work reflected that. He wanted to help make the world a better place.